Hello everyone. I'm and I'm working on a collaborative doctoral project with the Bodleian Libraries at the University of Oxford and the University of Glasgow. So it's sort of a hybrid sort of setup. And this is the very long title of my project that I didn't come up with. But essentially what I'm trying to do is to explore scholarly perceptions of knowledge organization across disciplines. But I want you to bear in mind that I mean knowledge organization and mental models in the broadest sense possible. So the full title of the project is Mental Models of the Organization of Scholarly Information Across the Academy, Disciplinary Similarities and Differences. So I'm going to go over why I'm doing what I'm doing, some of the existing literature, and then the research question that is driving this research. Methodology, a couple of pilot studies that I conducted, the limitations, which are endless, but it's just a little summary of some of them, and where I'm at the end. So essentially, the purpose of the study is to investigate the mental models that researchers at the University of Glasgow and the University of Oxford have of the structure and organization of knowledge in their own disciplines, and to explore the implications this might have upon scholars' approaches to literature discovery. And by mental models, I'm talking about a concept from cognitive science and psychology that refers to a cognitive architecture that sort of shapes decision-making, reasoning, and behavior. The project originated from a study at the Bodleian Libraries that suggested that a specific group of scholars, a subset of their library users, searched in a very particular way that was different to others. Actually, historians who are very persistently looking for very narrow, specific things, whereas others might approach more of a funneling kind of approach, where they started with something broad and then went specific. So the question that drove the sort of creation of this project was why? And how do disciplines shape information behavior and inform the things that scholars do when they're looking for or browsing or interacting with their information environment? And another question is, can investigating researchers' mental models of the structure of and organization of knowledge in their own fields help us better understand their motivations and expectations of literature search and discovery? And I apologize for this slide, it's a lot of text. Please don't bother reading it. I'll just tell you what it says. So across the top, I've sort of cherry-picked some key studies in information behavior. So on the top, there are more general sort of models of how information behavior works. There's Marshall Bates's berry-picking model from 1989. There's a sense-making framework. Tom Wilson had various models across the years that have developed. And what's really nice about Wilson's models is that they include personal, social, environmental factors in the information environment and how people interact with the information environment, and how that might also pose barriers in the ways that they search for or don't search for information. And then across the bottom are more scholarly or student-oriented research-based models. So Ellis's information-seeking model is of social scientists. Unsworth's scholarly primitives has to do with humanists, and Kultau developed a model of information search process which was based on undergraduate students and high school students. And Kultau's model actually included feelings and thoughts, which is a bit novel in the sense of information behavior models. And I've also looked at other existing studies that are a little more current. From 2007 to 2011, there was a research body called the Research Information Network that looked at, that produced 3 different reports on the information practices of UK scholars in the life sciences, in the humanities, and the physical sciences. And it was comparative, but it's from some time ago. And then from 2012 to 2020, there was another body called Ithaca SNR that looked at 10 different disciplines and the changing practices of researchers in North American higher education institutions. And it was somewhat comparative, but it really had to do with really trying to understand what researchers today are doing with the wake of technology and changes that come with the new tools and resources that scholars have access to. And so these studies really looked at research methods and practices and what people are doing today in research, but not necessarily why. Yes. Thank you. So they lack explanatory power, which is what my study is trying to address. So I believe David's presentation had this as well, but I have a black box here, which has to do with my research question. So the premise of sort of the research question is that there is an unknown researcher's disciplinary mental model that we're trying to tap into that sort of shapes discipline-specific research practices and information-seeking behavior. And this is informed by disciplinary training in higher education institutions. So you learn how to think and sort of subject matter through your curricula in higher education institutions. That kind of informs the ways that you think and conduct research in different disciplines. And then that leads to discipline-specific research practices and information-related behaviors. And this is obviously very simplified, but it's just to show you, try to hone into what I'm looking at here. So this is a rundown of my method. I'm trying to apply a qualitative approach to this research. It's inductive, iterative, grounded, or at least it's trying to be. And I'm basing it on library UX and ethnography inspired methods. So I'm trying to ask the researcher to tell me about what they're doing through their own words. And I'm using cognitive mapping and semi-structured interviews. And I'm trying to hold these in person on campus in people's offices if possible. And I'm trying to interview 40 researchers, 20 in Glasgow and 20 in Oxford, 5 in each of the different disciplines. And oh, yeah, so they're approximately an hour long. They're hour-long interviews that has a drawing component. So cognitive mapping is an exercise where you ask people to draw something in 6 minutes with 3 different colors to show the first, second, and third things that they drew. And my prompt was to please draw your discipline. So after a few preliminary questions in the drawing prompt, I asked more in-depth questions about the affective aspect of conducting research in their discipline, the setting environment, so their work sort of environment, research practices, and communication practices in their discipline. And sorry, it's another block of text, but to give you a bit more of the approach that I'm using, it's based on library ethnography. And Donna Lanklos is actually an anthropologist who works very closely with libraries and has described ethnography as a cluster of techniques that tries to get detailed descriptions of everyday behavior. And they provide ways for researchers to gain insight into the logic behind what people do. And library UX is related to that, and it's kind of a subset of that. So it's really a collection of techniques derived from ethnography, usability, and service design. I'm sure you're very familiar with UX, but there's a specific kind of library-related UX. And Andy Priestner and Matt Borg are really big in that community that really drives these sort of methodologies and this kind of approach to researching users in a more holistic and in a detailed way. So I'm doing 4 different case studies of researchers in chemistry, history, law, and medicine. And it's meant to be a cross-comparative approach. And these are 2 of my pilot studies where I asked researchers in chemistry and in history to draw their discipline, and they approached it in a very different way, as you can see. The historian I asked them to draw something, and they went straight to text. They didn't even ask me. So they started writing away. And whereas the chemists, they tended to, I mean, these are my pilot studies, but these have been patterns that have recurred in other drawings, and I'm halfway through the sort of data collection process. And the chemists were very comfortable in drawing and expressing what they did in a visual way. And it was very apparent that they conceived of the different disciplines, particularly maths, physics, and biology, as very much interrelated with chemistry. And that came through in a lot of their drawings. And historians, as I said, somehow, the textual side of things, it makes sense that they may want to have written down what they're working with first. It wasn't the case for all of them, but it was kind of a pattern where they would ask, can I just write it down? Can I write stuff down because it's too complicated? So, you know, there's a bigger textual element, and it was quite logical in the way, and for some of them, in the ways that they portray their discipline.
So that's 10 minutes, but maybe do cover those and we'll just take a bit of less time for questions.
Well, the rest of it is the limitations and challenges, which is, you know, I'm the human instrument, so I have my challenges in terms of conducting interviews. This is something that I had to learn. I only can cover 4 disciplines because, again, I'm one person, and yeah, the sample size was also sort of something that I had to discuss with my supervisors in terms of determining how many to interview to have a rich sort of body of information. And there's a limited time frame and a limited funding that I have to conduct these interviews. And I'm also going down to Oxford and doing some of it in Glasgow. So there's that kind of component. And capturing mental models obviously is quite a challenge because it's my mental model, their mental model, which is changing. So yeah, so currently I'm in data collection phase, and I'm currently interviewing academics in Glasgow, and I'm planning to go down to Oxford soon to conduct more interviews. And that's it. Thanks for listening.